Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading for that day. And this week, our reading is centered around the book of Mark. Today I'm joined by Chris Rexroad and Sheryl Daughety, and we're going to dive into a question from our reading in Mark chapter 10, verses 35 through 45. And so this is James and John and their mom trying to get them favor. That's what this is about. And Jesus finishes, so this is kind of a takeoff, a good place for us to talk about following up yesterday's conversation. He says, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, just that word slave creates all kinds of connotations in our culture and backlash if it's used, in the wrong terminology. Slaves were not uncommon during this time, and it was something they could understand. But Jesus says, if you want to be first, you must be a slave to everyone else. So how is serving people similar to or like being a slave to people?
You'd be submitting your own will, your own desires to meet the needs of others, thinking about them first, and even giving up of your time and energy and money and stuff like that, a slave, you would see that in their life too. But the difference from my perspective is that you're doing it by choice.
You can easily take a day and fill it from beginning to end with things you'd like to do, with your own time. But making yourself a slave to someone means that you're putting their agenda, their wants, their needs before your own.
Is that right? When I think of the term slave, I think of you don't have a choice in the matter. You're obligated, almost forced by force to do it. Mm-hmm. Is that the way you think of leadership or serving others, or is that an over-exaggeration? Because now the one thing we can know is that there were, the way I understand Scripture, slaves or servants who chose that route. They weren't bought and sold. It was they became a servant or a slave to a person.
They basically, because a lot of them were going through hardship, so they basically sign up to be a slave. Would it be like an indentured servant that we had here in America, that they would basically have part of their life paid for in order to get here, and they would work, and then they were released?
Right.
Yeah, it would have been similar to that, right?
I would think so.
Yeah.
And in Scripture, in the Jewish culture, after 7 years, they were released anyway. They couldn't hold them longer than that. But I hear some people try to put slavery in a positive light, but I don't think of slavery in a positive light. But as a leader of people, I find times where I genuinely feel like I'm a slave to what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm bound to it. Like, I'm obligated to it, and I feel guilty if I do otherwise. Do y'all have those thoughts or emotions?
I mean, looking at Scripture in different ways, seeing where, we were bought at a price, and, slaves always have masters. Our master is not the people around us. It's God. Our work that he's calling us to do has to do with the people around us. So in that way, but sometimes when life gets unbalanced and you're worn down and tired and, your schedule's maxed out and stuff, it can feel a whole lot more like slavery.
Like something you didn't actually choose.
Yeah, you didn't choose it. But it's something you get up every day and you choose to do.
I mean, I feel like in some ways Jesus was using this term in a different context too, because, I mean, even for himself, he knew that in order for him to accomplish everything that God sent him to accomplish, that he was a slave to the will of his Father. It wasn't, he got to experience friendships and love and joyfulness in his life, but it was as a result of being obedient to his Father, not because these were things he was necessarily choosing for himself, I think.
Is somewhat the because what I found was Jesus would often say things in extreme to rein back in a different extreme that they had said. So he's saying this in response to, we want to be in charge. We want to be on your right and your left. We want to be, vice Jesus or whatever, assistant Jesus.
Well, and I think part of what he's trying to tell them is like, you don't really understand what you're asking for
exactly.
here.
You don't even know what you don't. Yeah. I would agree with that. It's like on the outside, there will be people who will say, I don't want to impose on your time. I know you're busy. Whatever, they lead in with that, but then they, whatever, make the ask that they're asking or lay at my feet, whatever it is they're laying at my feet. And I feel obligated to either go or listen or participate or help. And I can't say, I could. I struggle to say, this isn't a good time. I can't right now. We should later. Because I feel they don't approach me thinking they're my master. Now, I've seen some church situations where, people were horribly out of balance and, they felt like they were in charge and you had to do whatever. I don't get that most of the time from people. They genuinely don't want to be a burden, but in that moment, it's the most important thing for them. And I feel obligated, in that moment. And we don't, there are plenty of preacher jokes where you only work one day a week or whatever, there are, even in our jobs, for the most part, 90% of the things we do with our with the people will come in hours where normal people are not doing anything because they've been at work all day. And if we're going to have a meeting or we're going to counsel or whatever, it's got to be at night. It's got to be in the evening when everybody else is going home and and it doesn't, well, you've had the whole day off. Well, no, not really, because there's been 1,000 other things, going on that you had to do. And it becomes really complicated, because I think of you still have a son in school, and you got one that just graduated. There are certain obligations that you have to them as a family. Kevin has his own career, so in your case, Jeannie has her own career. And so when you would normally be coming back together, you're often separating to go take care of something. Yeah. I'm in a fortunate situation where my spouse can go and do some of those things with me. But, we don't understand. And people say, well, I would like to be able to do that. But you just don't understand sometimes the sacrifice that goes along with it. And for me, the thing I would say, one of the greatest tolls is people give you their worst situations, right? And if it was just this one situation, that's one thing. But when daily or weekly you're getting these life crises, it's hard to set them aside, because God's called you to shepherd the people.
Mm-hmm.
He's called you to pray for the people, care for the people. So on a daily basis, you got to wear it, care about it, think about it, process it. How do I deal with this? And, I think Jesus is trying to tell them, you have no idea what you're asking for. You're asking for this glorified position. It's what we were talking about yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking to be first, but you don't know how many times you're going to have to be last.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of other places where people feel obligated? I'll give you an example that I don't think is the case anymore, but I think there's a reason why we call them that. We call politicians public servants because in reality they are the servant. They're there to serve the people. They're at the will of the people, but that world has changed now. They do what's in their best interest, not what's in the people's best interest. But in reality, that should be how they lead. Even in a corporate setting, a corporate CEO should make decisions that's in the welfare of all the people instead of what's in the welfare of, my stock options or the people who have the most influence in this room. So.
Well, I mean, I think successful parenting is.
Have you ever felt like a slave?
Yeah.
You felt like you were to help?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I'm definitely not getting paid for it.
Have you ever told them that?
Uh-huh.
One of the funniest things.
No, I'm like, I'm not your slave or your housekeeper.
Yeah. But you felt like it.
Yes, sometimes.
There was this, there's a lady comes to church here. And I thought she was quiet and meek. We were at a marriage conference. This was early in my time here at Open Door. I mean, like the first year or so I was here. And we were sitting in a circle, and there's probably 25, 30 people in there. And she said, I'm sick of my kids. She said this morning, or it was the previous Sunday, I think. She got up to go to, she said, I got up to go to church. And she said, they won't listen. And she said, I wrote them a letter. I resign as being your mama. I am tired. It was funny to hear her too. I resign as being your mama. I'm tired of being treated this way, and you're not listening to me.
It's not that easy.
No, you don't get to resign as being a mom or dad.
Yeah.
But parenting is a lot that way. Mm-hmm. Successful serving feels like slavery at times. Mm-hmm. And there are probably some people who have a better idea of slavery than I do, and you're going to take, how do you know what slavery feels like? I'm trying to give as best synopsis as I can.
And I mean, we have slavery in the Bible, but slavery is not something that God ever wanted people to experience. But I believe that he knew that it would be a place that people would end up and that they would at least be taken care of during that time, at least from the perspective of how they were doing that with the Israelites, not the slavery that we had here in America, but the slavery that took place there, where somebody had hit a bottom, needed help, needed a place to stay, and trade off for that was the type of work that they did, and then after a certain amount of time or paying back, they were released from it, and they could move on in life and be back on their feet.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around the book of Mark.